everyone has the equal right to choose how they will think and behave. But that's not what Dorfman is arguing here. He is arguing that there was a human rights violation. He is trying to change the definition of a human rights violation and say that his right to deny reality and someone else not going along with him is equal to what we as a country have always understood human rights violations to be.
From Living Word Church, you're listening to the Living the Word podcast, encouraging you to walk steadfastly in your Christian faith.
Welcome back to the Living the Word podcast. It's been a little while since we've done a podcast. This is Ben Buffkin here, and we haven't done a podcast, I think, since July of 2023. And here we are in January of 2024. So we're glad to be back. I'm glad to be back doing the podcast. We're going to do something a little different than what we've done in the past. Normally, I'd have my sidekick here, Pastor Dominic Ferrone, our youth pastor at Living Word. But I decided I wanted to do a series of podcasts for this entire year, for 2024. And I want to help us as Christians think biblically about the news stories that we see run across our news feeds on social media, or we see on news websites that we look at, or the news stories we see on the news channels that we watch. And many times we'll come across stories as Christians that we have a hard time thinking correctly about it, or we struggle, or we want to know, what does the Bible say about this story? And what I want to do is help give us a biblical worldview about some of the headlines that are coming across our eyes. And so we're going to take one per week. I will have a limitless supply of content, no shortage of stories that we have access to. And I'm going to pick some that I think would be important for us to talk about, for us to think about as Christians and have a biblical worldview on. So let's start with the story. Many of you may have seen this on social media, or you read it on a news outlet, but there was a transgender actress named Tommy Dorfman who claimed that workers for Delta Airlines intentionally misgendered him and committed a human rights violation. And so Tommy Dorfman posted this on TikTok, a short clip on Christmas Eve. Dorfman's 31 years old, and he says, quote, "What about when a Delta employee misgenders you intentionally while you're standing by the departure gate?" And so in the TikTok video, you can hear the worker saying she and then he before being cut off. And in the clip, Dorfman replies, "You just misgendered me." So the Delta employee responded to Dorfman and said that she was being intentionally condescending to him. Well, Dorfman responded in the caption of the TikTok video and said this, quote, "I did not realize it was condescending to flag a, quote, human rights violation after an employee misgendered me incessantly." So there's some obvious biblical worldview issues to address in this story. To start with, we know that according to God's word in Genesis, it says that God made male and he made female. God has made human beings to be either male or female. Biologically, there is no debate on this matter. It is impossible for a man to be a woman or for a woman to be a man. And any claim otherwise is a denial of reality. That's not what I want to address here, though that is an important worldview issue, one that we have been thinking about for a couple of decades now. What is shocking to consider, what I want us to think about, is Dorfman's claim that his human rights were violated because a Delta employee unintentionally used the wrong pronoun. A human rights violation. This is a strong accusation. It leads to the question, well, then what is a human rights violation? Traditionally, we would say that human rights violations would center around the basic rights that human beings have for safety and protection, or human rights during times of war, war crimes and human rights, torture and human rights. What's interesting is that the LGBTQ movement continues to push to include themselves in categories like discrimination, human rights violations, that have long shaped the ways in which human beings have treated one another. So as Christians, what are we to think? How are we to respond? Well, the first glaring reality that stands out to me is a clear contradiction happening in this story. How can someone's human rights be violated when they are basing those violations around something that is not humanly possible? It is not humanly possible for a man to be a woman. Therefore, no human right has been violated. Do people have human rights to embrace all kinds of different non-realities or sinful identities? Well, absolutely. Everyone has the equal right to choose how they will think and behave. But that's not what Dorfman is arguing here. He is arguing that there was a human rights violation. He is trying to change the definition of a human rights violation and say that his right to deny reality and someone else not going along with him is equal to what we as a country have always understood human rights violations to be. So I want us to think a little deeper here and process what Tommy Dorfman is doing to the definition of human rights violations. The pro-choice abortion movement has for many, many decades violated the rights of real human beings in mothers' wombs by arguing two basic things. The movement argues that the human being in the womb is not actually a viable human. And secondly, that one human being, namely the mother, has a greater right to live than another human being, meaning the baby. So in essence, the argument is that location, the mother's womb, and power, the power of the mother, being the determining factor. So do you see the connection? A transgender actress or actor who is denying creation reality is claiming to have experienced human rights violations. And for many decades, actual human beings who can't speak for themselves have had their God-given right to life taken from them based upon a denial of creation reality. Are you tracking with that? It's the same denial of reality. So as Christians, how should we think? Well, we should be grieved over the fact that a man who can speak for himself and say whatever he wants and live in denial of his own biology, denial of reality, has more of a voice than the many babies who are murdered in mothers' wombs, or a whole nother subject, has more of a voice than the many children who have their actual human rights of safety violated when they are abducted and sold into sex slavery. So it is grieving. And here's how we should think about this as Christians. It is grieving, and I believe offensive to God, when real human rights violations take place. As Christians, we should pray for men like Tommy Dorfman. This is our response. We should pray for his eyes to be open to the reality of who God created him to be, and for his eyes to be open to the price that Christ paid for his freedom and for his salvation. So you should pray. We should all pray for Tommy Dorfman. Well, that is the first episode. That is the kickoff episode to our Biblical Worldview series that we're going to do in 2024. Next week, we'll look at a little bit of a lighter subject, and we're going to talk about a woman from Florida who is suing the Hershey's Candy Company for a misleading advertisement on the Reese's pumpkin candy. We'll see you next time.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode. If you would like to submit a potential question, a topic, or an idea for a future episode, or learn more about the Living the Word podcast, you can visit us at livingwordhoma.com. We would like to say thanks to all of you who subscribed, shared episodes, and left reviews. Living the Word podcast is a production of Living Word Church in Houma, Louisiana, under the leadership of Pastor Ben Bufkin. Our prayer is that you will remain faithful to living the Word.